2004 that this was going to end in complete disaster. And at the time, I knew that the banking system would collapse, because I knew that collateralizing all these loans was real estate that had nowhere near the value that the banks were assigning to it. And I knew that people were buying real estate with practically no down payment, and people who own real estate were extracting whatever equity was there. I remember pointing to the fact that even in 2005, 2006, even after this huge increase in home values, that home equity was at an all-time record low. That individuals had borrowed out more than their houses had appreciated, even though the appreciation was unprecedented during the prior 10-year period. I put that chart in my book, in Crash Proof, and I said, imagine what this graph is going to look like when the housing bubble bursts. And of course that's what happened. So I knew that this was going to be a complete disaster. And I was hopeful, although I wasn't necessarily optimistic, that the government would not make the same mistake again. That it would allow the recession to run its course. And I knew it would be a big one. It would take years, and it might be called a depression, because the bust is proportionate to the boom. We had the biggest boom, we're going to have the biggest bust. We had the most malinvestments to work out. It wasn't going to be an easy transition. But once again, the government acted in unprecedented irresponsibility and took that whole, stimulus to a level that I probably didn't even dream was possible as far as what the government has done. And people are now confident that the government did the right thing, that they saved the day, that by doing exactly what Alan Greenspan did, Ben Bernanke saved the day. By doing exactly what George Bush did, President Obama saved us. Well, how is that? If it didn't work before, why should it work now? And the fact of the matter is, we didn't just do exactly what they did. We did what they did like times 100. We just took the exact same mistakes and made them on a bigger level, and now we expect it to work. Why would it work? It's going to produce an even bigger problem when the stimulus wears off, because this is an even bigger stimulus, and it's going to require an even bigger withdrawal to get it out of the system. The country is now much deeper in debt than it was before. See, the problems during the phony boom was that we were borrowing and spending too much money. That was the reality. We weren't saving enough, we weren't producing enough. So we had huge trade deficits because we weren't making stuff. And asset prices were way out of line with reality. And we had too many people working in the service sector, too many people working in finance, too many people working in retail, too many people working in housing, and not enough people working in manufacturing and other areas, infrastructure, different things that we needed that were neglected during the boom. And instead of allowing those resources to be reallocated, instead of allowing this country to replenish its depleted pool of savings, of course, during the bubble, right, when tax revenues were flowing into the Treasury, not only in Washington, but here in Hartford, governments got too big. They saw all these capital gains taxes and all the taxes on real estate transactions, and as people were spending their home equity extractions, and they were paying sales taxes and spending money, and all the people were earning extra income. The governments didn't look at that as a temporary thing. They just assumed it would go on forever, and they just grew and expanded government. So when the bubble burst, the responsible thing would have been for governments to shrink, to realize that they overexpanded during the boom, and they had to cut back on a national level and on the state and local level. But none of that is happening. The government is expanding. The federal government is spending more. We just announced the budget, Obama's proposed budget on Monday. $3.8 trillion in 1 year. $3.8 trillion. And the states are just, their budgets, they're not making any cuts, they're spending. We're not doing anything. And the biggest thing about that really strikes me in that budget of $3.8 trillion, is that the deficit is better than 60% of the tax collection. For every dollar the government collects in taxes, they're spending $1.60. And then they call that a budget. How is that a budget? It doesn't even resemble a budget, right? A budget, you have to balance your expenditures with your income. How can you set out and say, here's my budget, I'm going to spend $1.60 and I only earned $1? Now, I can see if there was like a major catastrophe, like a war broke out or something, but this is what they plan to do from the start. And of course, there's probably going to be something that's going to happen. I'm sure that they're going to end up spending over $4 trillion. And meanwhile, something else that I just read about that happened today, for the first time, I think, in 25 years, the Social Security Trust Fund, in quotes, is now paying out more in benefits than it's collecting in taxes. That's a huge thing. It's a huge event. Because so many people are losing their jobs, they're not paying tax anymore. Which means this pay-as-you-go system is gone. It went. And now, the government, instead of being able to take all those Social Security taxes and use them to offset the budget deficit, now the deficit in the Social Security Trust Fund is going to increase the overall deficit. The government has to borrow money not only to fund its spending, but to fund the deficit in Social Security. So, this is just going off the charts. And, people are worried about, right now people are paying attention to the problems in countries like Greece. Greece is only, their deficit is only about 31% of their tax revenues. Ours is more than twice that. We've got bigger problems than even Greece, but the one thing that we have that Greece doesn't is a printing press, because Greece can't print euros. Greece is kind of in the situation of California, where they have, California's budget looks very much like Greece's. And Greece is hoping they get a bailout from the EU, and California is hoping they get a bailout from Washington. But Washington itself is in worse shape. The only thing it's got is that it can print money, and the money it prints is the world's reserve currency. And so we've got a lot more rope with which to hang ourselves, but we will hang ourselves eventually. And people are, jump to the wrong conclusions. And unfortunately, as the dollar does benefit temporarily from problems in other parts of the world, that enables us to go deeper into debt, which only puts us into a bigger problem. So where we are now is the economy is in infinitely worse shape than it was prior to the collapse. We have much more debt, certainly a lot more public debt than we have, but private debt, there really hasn't been that much deleveraging in the private sector. People talk about it, but there's a tremendous amount of leverage. Individuals are still levered up completely. They still have enormous mortgage debt, student loan debt, credit card debt, automobile loans. More so now because of the stupid, cash for clunkers program that convinced people to take cars that were fully paid for at work and destroy them in order to go into debt to buy cars they couldn't afford. So, we have more debt on individuals. Certainly, the government is deeper in debt. And so we have an even bigger problem. And we are not allowing resources to go back where they need. We're kind of holding them hostage where they should be. We're bailing out companies in the financial sector and keeping them in business when the free market would bankrupt them for good reason, because it wants to reallocate that labor and that capital to more efficient uses. You have the government running General Motors and Chrysler, and instead of running them in a profitable manner, they're now running them for the benefit of the labor unions. And so these are never going to be productive, viable companies. They are now, in effect, government agencies, the same as Freddie and Fannie. In fact, Freddie and Fannie are acting much more irresponsibly now than they did before, now that the government has officially, taken them over. And it's amazing, too, that the guys that are running Freddie and Fannie, the executives, they're getting paid like $4, $5, $6 million salaries. Why? They're not running companies anymore. They're running government agencies. Why are they being paid more than the president? It doesn't make any sense. If a private company wants to pay its employees, its executives, high amounts of money, that's up to them. If they think that by paying this high amount of money, we're going to generate more profits for ourselves, and if they think it's worthwhile. But Fannie and Freddie will never generate profits. They're only generating losses. Anybody can lose money. You don't have to pay somebody $5 million a year to lose money. There are plenty of unemployed people that will lose money for a lot less than that. But the whole thing is ridiculous. And then you have the politicians that are criticizing bonuses in the private sector when they're making big bonuses in the one area where they can control it. Same thing with AIG. They're still giving bonuses to AIG. Why? They're losing a fortune. They say, well, if we don't give these guys bonuses, they'll quit. Well, let them quit. Why do we even need these companies? The government made believe that we needed Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. Why? Why do we need them? Why can't they go bankrupt? We don't need them. They're just people. The people can go work someplace else. There's There's not a lot of real assets to be liquidated at these companies. I mean, it's all their people. They can go anywhere. They can start their own